everyone. My name is Yolanda Thompson. I'm hosting Timeout Tuesday today. So please like, share, and comment. Pastor Orr would like 1,000 shares. Every third Tuesday of the month, we will be taking out the time to discuss all things mental health. Here's our hostess for today.
Hey guys, my name is Jessica Reed. I'm one of the Jessicas with Timeout Tuesday. I'm a licensed professional counselor. I'm the owner of Reed Counseling and Consulting, and turn it over to the other Jessica.
I'm the other Jessica. I'm the owner of Grace Counseling and Consulting located in Hernando. I'm a licensed professional counselor and so glad to be here taking the time out with y'all on Tuesday.
And thank you guys for taking out the time. Our April's title is Contending for the Faith While Dealing with Trauma. Contending means in the Bible to strive or vie in contest or rivalry against difficulties. So that means struggles. We're going to talk about how people deal with trauma and how they struggle with trauma. So ladies, our first question is, what is trauma?
So my definition is trauma is a deeply disturbing experience that has happened to someone. And it can come in various ways. There could be a trauma to your body, car accidents, a crime. There's a lot of different ways that we can categorize a traumatic event. What would you say?
Yeah, I would say trauma is complicated because it's not a one-size-fits-all. It's basically what feels emotionally, physically stressful to the person. So, for example, I could have a traumatic response to losing a pet and Jessica not. And we both have, our own experience with that. So I think when you recognize it is something that gives you some unpleasant emotions. It kind of impacts your daily functioning. Bless you. And we'll get into some of the other signs and symptoms of that.
Okay, so how does trauma affect a person emotionally and I would say mentally?
Oh, emotionally, it can show up in so many various ways. It can come in the form of depression, some crying, some withdrawal. We can see hypervigilance in their actions. I think
you want to tell them what hypervigilance is?
Yeah, so hypervigilance is when they're always on guard. So you're always looking, just afraid that something's going to happen. So you're just extra aware. And so I think, like you said, trauma and just kind of how it shows up emotionally, even mentally, it can look different for every individual. And I know with our clients, when they experience traumatic events and they're coming in for therapy, I think they all present a different way.
Yeah. Yes. And I think from an emotional standpoint, trauma can look like numbing. So you don't necessarily feel anything. And so if a person's not feeling something, they might feel like, oh, this isn't traumatic. I don't think about it. It doesn't bother me. But that is one of the emotional signs that you might have in addition to some intrusive thoughts, which is just negative thinking about the event. You might not have the ability to feel something. And so I like that you pointed out like the hypervigilance piece. There are also some other, I think, mental things that do mirror other mental health symptoms like anxiety, depression, racing thoughts. Someone might feel like the core of that might be trauma, but they're coming in for anxiety. So for a lot of clients that I work with, they're coming in saying, I'm depressed. Well, when we get into talking about the depression, the anxiety, the overfunctioning, like it's connected, the core root is connected to a traumatic event.
Okay, good. So how does trauma affect a child versus an adult, or I would say a woman or a man? How does that look?
So we talked about the hypervigilance and things like that. And so in my practice, in my experience, I've given trauma assessments to young kiddos, I call them kiddos, kids, children, and looking at their symptoms after they have experienced a traumatic event, whether there's an increase in anger, increase in depression, increase in anxiety, disassociation, where they're checking out mentally, maybe daydreaming a lot, not really in tune. You think they're kind of spaced out. Sometimes trauma can look like ADHD with children.
Oh, a lot of times.
And a lot of times our kids are misdiagnosed with ADHD because we have not assessed for that traumatic event that they've experienced. So they may be bouncing around. They may be hypervigilant in class. They may be unable to really focus. And it's not so much the ADHD. And I'm not ruling it. I'm not saying that, children don't have ADHD. I'm saying some that have experienced a traumatic event, it can present that way with children. And, it looks totally different for adults.
Yeah. I would say that the symptoms, screening everybody using some trauma-informed assessment would be ideal. Every person that walks in our practice, we screen for trauma because there's no one on the planet that has not had some unexpected event that really rocked their world that they didn't plan for. And that is the root of what can cause more vulnerabilities to feeling a traumatic event. I know trauma is like a buzzword right now. And so I think getting clearly defined, the things that I think differentiate man and woman are more societal issues, right? So do I feel comfortable expressing myself as a man versus like a woman? But all of that goes into how you were raised, how you view yourself. So I think when it comes to gender, I don't think that there's a true diagnosable difference, but there might be different ways we allow ourselves to experience it because of our gender.
So I heard you guys say assessment and screening. Can you break that down to the people that might not know what that is?
Yeah. So one of the screenings two of the screenings we use. So I got trained many years ago in cognitive behavioral trauma therapy for children. So that is a screening that is specifically for kiddos that have experienced traumatic events. And when we're talking about children, we're talking about birth to age 18, right? And so we also use the ACEs, the Adverse Childhood Questionnaire, which screens you from the same age, but I screen all beyond 18 and above for that. But there are many trauma-informed assessments out there. Can you think of any other ones?
There is, like I use the TSCC, the trauma symptom checklist.
Oh, yeah.
There's the UCLA. There's a lot of, like she said, there's a lot of trauma assessments that can be used. And as therapists, we're trained to not only administer them, but also to interpret the results so that when we do have a client that come in and their symptoms are showing like clinical elevation, we can share that with them and let them know how to move forward with treatment.
Right. Yeah.
So what are some causes of trauma?
I mean, literally, it can
be anything.
anything.
Like she said, it could be a pet or a family member passing away. It could be a car accident. It could be experiencing a crime,
a breakup.
There's physical abuse, sexual abuse. All of those are traumatic. Trauma within families. How sometimes we treat each other. And
birth
trauma
can be traumatic. Literally anything that someone can experience that causes stress for them in any way can be viewed as that. So I think the better question would have someone ask themselves what in their life has been really scary, confusing, upsetting that they still think about or feel.
So I would say, do you think church hurt can lead to trauma?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So when I think about it, something deeply disturbing, something that you did not expect to happen, and it's still causing you some kind of anguish. I think church hurt falls within that category, Sometimes we experience things that we aren't expecting that hurts our feelings. And if it happens within the church, then of course that church hurt can be traumatic for someone. Yeah.
And I think one of maybe a barrier within the church that could make things fall into the category of being traumatic is that there are not a lot of safe spaces to talk about the hurt with either the people that caused it or having that sense of community. And I think some of that can be kind of broken down to normalizing that people will be hurt in church because church people are no different than people that don't go to church, right? We all in the same place with a similar belief. So we are not above causing a disturbing event to another person.
Right.
So you said something that is not a safe space. I think we also have to remember that when it comes to families as well, and discussing trauma, trauma that happens within the families, because sometimes, especially in our community, it's a little, we don't talk about that.
Yeah.
You don't tell anyone what
Right.
happens in this household.
Yes.
And that's a good, I think, segue when you mentioned the difference between child trauma and adult.
The trauma.
So as a
Yes.
child, if I grew up with distressing events, but I didn't have a voice to speak up about that,
Yes.
and I was told, and I know y'all probably heard this too, what goes on in the house,
Stay
in the house.
right.
Okay. So then I grow up as an adult and I feel like I should not be speaking on these things because it wasn't appropriate to do. And so you're also unlearning some of those unhelpful tapes that I think were rooted in some sort of protection, but they really weren't healthy habits to deal with hurt productively.
Right.
Yeah.
So how do someone support a loved one or a friend that is experiencing trauma?
So the first thing you need to do is validate that experience.
Yes.
You are not able to say, that didn't hurt you. That wasn't that big of a deal.
Right.
If they said it felt traumatic, it hurt, then you need to validate and say, I understand, or I'm sorry that happened to you, right? Because a large part of the confusion with trauma is feeling that I'm alone in this, somebody doesn't get it, and then they're even questioning like, well, is it really that big of a deal?
Yeah.
Should I
Did it
really be
really
speaking up
happen?
about this? So you need an advocate that says, no, this was not okay. And it's okay for you to not be okay about it. And also there are things we can do to help you feel better.
I think definitely showing up for that person in the way that they need you to show up. So
That's
as
the
my
key.
friend, I may not want you to play my therapist, but I may feel okay with, you know what, let's go for a walk. Or, let's
Checking
just,
in on
let's
me
just
more.
hang out. Yeah. It's different ways. And I think sometimes we have to support people the way that they need to be supported, not the way that we want to support them because it may not work for them.
I'm glad you touched bases on that because people like, I want to play therapist or I want to support you the way I might deal with the situation. Everybody deal with it differently.
And two disclaimers on there, I think, because one, we didn't say it in the beginning. This is not therapy, right? So we cannot take anything we're saying here and be like, yeah, a therapist said, we are therapists and we are giving education, but it is not to be used as a replacement for therapy. So if you guys need those referrals, we got you. Thing one. But then also, when you mentioned the part about supporting them in the way that they need to be supported, that will require us to accept if we were the person that hurt them. And sometimes that denial adds a traumatic experience within itself because not only did it hurt, now you're telling me that you didn't do it or you didn't mean to. And that minimizes what I'm really thinking and feeling. So it's really important that if somebody has done something that's vulnerable enough to say, I'm hurt, that you have the space to nurture them emotionally or put them in a position with someone who can.
Yeah.
Right. So how does scripture support trauma treatment?
Oh, I think about, cast your fears. And one thing when I'm thinking about scripture and just any mental illness and when we're going through struggles, I go back to faith, right? So we cannot have faith that it's going to get better.
Right.
And also question, will it get better? So if we are believers, having the faith that God is going to do what he said he's going to do. And he's going to put us in place to get the help that we need, to get the resources that we need. So having faith that his word is still true.
Yeah. And I would say when God talks about giving you what you need and putting people and things in place, that we could break that down into trauma or anything else that you need. One of the scriptures that come up for me is the one that I told you I couldn't remember the scripture, but I know that words about seeking wise counsel. So God gave different people gifts for different reasons. And just like we follow the pastor, there are people up under the pastor that helps him. There are people in the community, just like service workers, and we all have unique talents and abilities. And so trusting in those gifts that God has given people can actually be helpful. And most people will tell you if they've done therapy, not all of them probably are the best, but it is helpful when it's done right and when both parties are a good fit, like therapy can be really beneficial.
Right. So what are some steps to help with dealing with trauma? What steps should a person take?
Be honest with yourself.
Being honest, yeah.
You got to have the awareness and insight to know even thinking about your childhood. Not all trauma happens in childhood. I know that's a misconception that it's all connected to my childhood. It can be something that happened as an adult, anything. But I think kind of being honest with yourself and allowing yourself to feel, think, or whatever, not be okay, can give you some insight to maybe how deep-rooted trauma is, because I know a lot of people don't necessarily talk about it, but unresolved mental health issues can and will turn into medical issues, right? So when we think about cardiovascular disease, GI, all these things, they are long-term. They're connected. Everything is connected. Everything, all parts of us. Yes. There's so many parts of us spiritually, mentally, emotionally, physically, that go into, making us who we are. And so knowing that, getting checkups, ruling some things out, because sometimes clients will come in with symptoms of depression, but their thyroids are impaired, right? So,
or a kiddo will come in, oh, my stomach hurts. They're missing school for 7 days. Stomach hurts. But we're not addressing the underlying issue, that is some things mentally that's going on. And that's why they're having the GI issues.
Yeah. Oh, wow. So I would definitely say know yourself. And if you don't have the insight, work with enough providers that can give you the information. Start with medical screenings and health screenings and mental health screenings. You don't have to go see a therapist and start working with one to get an assessment. You can do an assessment or say, hey, I want to rule this out. Yeah. Can, you screen me for this? And we will do it.
Yeah. My next question for you ladies are, when should a person seek professional help?
Go ahead.
So I think if you have attempted to manage anything, I know we're talking about trauma, but anything on your own and with your external support system, family, friends, and you are not seeing any change, it would not hurt to check in with a healthcare professional.
Yeah, especially when you notice that you are unable to really regulate your emotions, and you feel like things are really just kind of out of your control. And again, not just with trauma, when you're experiencing anything mentally, I think that's when it's time to seek a professional and say, hey, I need some help with figuring this out.
Yeah. Okay. Anytime that something's impacting your daily functioning, so if it changes and alters anything that you used to do or were doing, that's a good indicator that your body is saying, I need more. And it's okay if you're not able to give yourself more. That's why we have so many resources that help people get back to themselves.
Right. And also just thinking on the lines of that when I'm thinking about it, also getting away from the negative connotation of going to therapy. Right. I think that's a big hurdle within itself. Just accepting I'm going to go see a therapist. A lot of people are afraid of the process because it's unfamiliar, but being open to it and open to getting the help that you need to face this difficult time that you're facing.
So what are some common ways a therapist might support a person with trauma?
Yeah. So outside of screening them and explaining those results, we'll develop a treatment plan. And so a couple of ways of trauma-informed care is CBT therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy. That is a well-versed and really effective modality that kind of shapes and helps a client understand how they think about their trauma, that makes them think about themselves, influences how they feel and what they do. So like the CBT triangle, it's thoughts, feelings, and behavior. So sometimes getting to the root of that is helpful. EMDR therapy is really, really trendy right now, but also highly effective. Emotionally focused trauma therapy is one of my new favorites.
That's my favorite.
Yeah. It's really emotionally charging work, but it's so helpful. And I'm speaking from personal and professional experience. I really like that one. So that medication, so we don't want to rule out the stigma of medication. In some cases, it is helpful for a person to get on medication, and you cannot stay on medication for a long time. Sometimes you can get on medication to stabilize yourself, to learn new skills, and then phase off. And then some people, based on your preference, you might like to continue taking it, and some people can just use other behavioral techniques.
Yeah. We mentioned adolescents, like the kiddos. There's the TFCBT, so the trauma-focused CBT. for the ones that have experienced that trauma and they're under the age of 18. So there's a lot of treatment modalities available.
Somatic therapy, which
Yeah.
a lot of people are getting into that now because trauma is thinking about like a derailing of the mind and the body. It gets disconnected. So anything that brings you back, brings your mind and your body back to its present self is going to be good trauma work. So if you master the mind, and we haven't really talked about the body, then you might still have some physical symptoms, even though the mental part has been, restored, if you will. So just think about trauma being a mind-body connection. When we have a traumatic experience, the brain hijacks itself to protect you from whatever is happening, and it derails. And so for years and years, we can get derailed, and those modalities help us get back on track.
Yep. So how can a spouse support their significant other who is dealing with trauma?
Okay.
I think definitely support. Well, I think number one is communication. So
I think
what do you
even like
so much, right? I'm like,
so much. But so from an attachment standpoint, I need every couple relationship. Everybody know both of you have trauma.
Right.
You're coming into that marriage,
exactly.
right? And a large part of understanding and supporting each other is knowing that I might unintentionally chafe something that was there, and it's either an opportunity to heal what we didn't know that was there, or we can give that pushback. And so when you say support, I think supporting yourself with good habits so that you can hold space for your partner is one of the most beautiful things you can do. Because if we getting together somewhere along our lived experience before we paired, we probably had something that impacted us. Yeah.
Supporting the communication and allowing for open communication so that your spouse can communicate those things that have happened to them and what they're feeling and what they're, kind of processing in the moment. And they may not want to respond back. They may just want you to listen. So just allowing that communication to be there and supporting your spouse in sharing in that moment.
So that requires a level of vulnerability and intimacy that, couples can work on. And I think that's something you'll ever be like strengthening when you're with the person. But I have to feel emotionally safe to share my wounds with you. Yes. And I also have to know that you probably have been consistent and dependable enough that you can hold this where we lift it together. Because when we're in a marriage, I don't have to lift this by myself.
Yes. Right.
We both are saying we are right here and we're going to lift this. And so the vulnerability piece is really helpful. Conflict resolution, like how will we handle hard topics? Yes. How will we handle when one of us is activated? Because if we're thinking about this from the lens of trauma, you might make me mad. And that reminded me of 10 years ago. I'm not responding to what's right now. I'm responding to all of this. Yeah. So you're like, wait a minute, what happened? This was too much. But it was right on track with everything that I'm holding. But you might not know that.
So I would definitely say it's good to be aware of what triggers your partner or just discuss those things that have harmed you in the past so you would know how to deal with that.
Yes.
And when we find those triggers, sharing it with our partners. Because sometimes we may not always be aware of the triggers. But if you're going to therapy and then you find those triggers, then sharing that with your partner so that maybe they will not do the actions. If something that you're doing is hurting me and it's, now I'm thinking about a traumatic event that happened in the past. Like you said, it's not even what's happening right now. It would be helpful for my husband to know so he could be more aware of that and more cognizant of, okay, maybe I will say this in a different way. But,
And I think considering that, giving each other some grace, because sometimes, like I said, you might chafe something that was already there that you had no idea about. And so understanding that there are parts of you that you don't meet until you are with another person. It doesn't matter how much healing you've done. There's a whole new journey when you pair your life with another human being. And you got to be ready for that.
You do.
Great point. So what are some coping mechanisms a person can use to deal with their trauma?
Some of the easier ones I think are like grounding.
Yeah.
So I think a trendy one that people see all the time is a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So engaging all of your senses or naming what you can see, hear, taste, touch, feel. Nature.
That's it. Sunlight. I
mean, when I tell you the simple things, like if we're thinking about what can I do right now in this moment, if I'm listening to this and I'm like, you know what, I felt something. What can I go do? Like grounding yourself in something that either is going to relax you or uplift you. Sometimes we do this by I'll tell some of the clients I'm working with, with trauma work is doing the opposite action.
Mhm.
So like if I'm activated and I want to shut down, I probably need to reach out to somebody, right? If I'm activated and I want to eat a whole gallon of ice cream, I might need to scale it back a bit and like go and do something else. But grounding, breath work, journaling,
Yeah.
getting your body
Therapy.
movement,
Yes.
like tension reduction is really, really helpful when the body
Sometimes
is
you
feeling
stretch.
keyed up.
We hold that trauma. We like the body
tension.
work that you talk. Sometimes we get stretched, that tension, all of that progressive
Yes.
muscle relaxation.
Oh, yes. That's one of my favorite. I do that like in between sessions.
Just on a regular day.
Because I'm holding mine, but I'm holding
I need
yours
to do
too.
it
Like
now
I
the
gotta
way-
get that out. Yes. So definitely think any that goes back to like the somatic part of like body work. And so you can even do that if we're going back to like a partnered space. Like that can be co-regulation, which if you're doing trauma work with a partner, a therapist might teach you guys how to co-regulate, where you're working together to soothe each other's nervous system.
Oh my God, great content, you guys. Thank you for coming out. And you guys, that wrap up our session for today. Thank you
Thank
for
y'all.
logging in. Please
You're
like,
welcome.
share, comment, and tag. Mental health is important and taking care of that trauma.